Hi, I'm author Gregory Burhoe, and I'm here to continue discussing my book, which is called Vendetta Ride, the true story of Wyatt Earp. In my last video, I was talking about the actual gunfight at the OK Corral. And this time I want to go into the so-called Earp Vendetta Ride, which is, of course, where the title of the book comes from. So, what happened? This is historical, fact. This is what happened historically. Because of the actual gunfight at the OK Corral, tensions are already very high between the Earp and the cowboy factions. And at this point, there was basically there seemed to have been a series of meetings that the cowboys had where they wanted revenge. But, ultimately, it looked like they were afraid to do much of anything. All along, there was a lot of talk of killing the Earps, but they never actually did anything. And so I think and for reasons that actually I'm going to lay out here, I believe that even Curly Bill Brocious, who's quite a character, if you've read my book, you already know that. If you haven't, wow. That's a whole other conversation, but Curly Bill Brocious was an interesting person. He was, in a way, you might say, a kind of Peter Pan type of boy that didn't want to grow up kind of thing, where he was a young man, but he was tall and broad-shouldered, and he was a leader of criminals, yet similar to Peter Pan, he was like a little boy in an adult man's body. And I base that on a number of things that he said and things he did and the way he did things. There was very obviously a youthful, boyish quality about him. And I don't mean that that's necessarily good or bad. Ultimately, it's bad, because when you grow up, you're supposed to be a mature, responsible man, not a child. That's just, right away you know that there's something, depending on how you look at it, different or wrong about him. It makes for a very fun character to write. He was so spontaneous and irresponsible. He had a sense of responsibility to his comrades, but yet in a way he was increasingly erratic, increasingly unpredictable. And he was known to be quite fearless, and he was also considered to be such a good shot that he could literally, a person could hold a quarter, hold a dime, a coin, and he could literally shoot it between their fingers. And some people think that's exaggerative. I'm sure people were just saying that, making that up. And actually, let me tell you something. My grandfather, my father's father, fought in World War II, and he was such a good marksman that other veterans who my father knew, who knew his father, told him that they could hold up a coin, and he could literally shoot it out between their fingers. So it sounds otherworldly, but no, actually, I fully believe that is entirely possible. It's just something that, obviously, it sounds so dangerous that it's not something that people would typically do. But there are plenty of I believe, situations in history where that sort of accuracy has been demonstrated. So, it may not be common, but I fully believe that that's entirely possible. So when people were saying that Curly Bill was able to do exactly that, I have to believe, at the very least, that it absolutely could have been true. So it's exciting, of course, to imagine he really was that good of an aim with a pistol. So I wrote it that way. There's no reason not to. There's no reason to assume that it wasn't true, especially since, from my perspective anyway, I see that as entirely possible. So, again, you can judge that however you want to, but supposedly he was that good of a shot, and at this point in time, I believe it. There isn't really anything to indicate that it wasn't true. However, what's interesting is that whenever Curly Bill had a chance to shoot and kill Wyatt Earp himself, he failed. And that's where it kind of gets interesting, because there's 2 occasions when Curly Bill could have killed easily, in each case, could have easily have killed Wyatt Earp, but yet he missed. And Curly Bill was not known to miss. He was feared. He was the head of the Cowboys, for reasons. Even though he was boy-like, kind of, very childlike in some ways, he was feared and respected for reasons. People wouldn't want to mess with him, Childish or childlike, or in some way, having that quality doesn't necessarily mean that he wouldn't be able to, of course, give someone a really good fight, like a fist fight, and be able to do everything that you would expect someone to do. Actually, he was a real wild character, and trying to keep this short and simple. There's a lot of stories like Pirates of the Caribbean where you've got an exaggeration of the truth, where pirates love being pirates. And in real life, I'm sure a lot of them, although they made the most of it, I'm sure, and took some pride in what they did, no doubt. I'm sure most of them would have loved to have gotten the hell away from that kind of life if they could have. And I'm sure there were those that wanted that life, many of whom would have found the reality to have been very disappointing, as I would imagine. Like there's always those people that want to go to war, or they want to know what it's like to kill people. I mean, there literally are people that want to go to war to find out what it's like to kill people, in a way that's legal, for their nation. And they find out that the reality, of course, is not anything that they would have liked. I mean, only an actual psychopath or a sociopath would actually be okay with that. War is a horrible experience for a number of reasons. And for one thing, it's a lot of hard work, very, very hard work, which is why farmers usually make the best soldiers, but I digress. So, yeah, the reality of being a member of the Cowboys and being wild and free, living your life for your own terms, I mean, the reality of it would have been horrible for any normal human being, or any human being that had any degree of actual empathy. And so not very many would have really loved and enjoyed the life. Sometimes, yes, like I say, they'd make the most of it. They'd get drunk and act out and try to enjoy it, But like anything else, I mean, I'm sure that the vast majority of those men, those cowboys, would have loved to have gotten out of that lifestyle. They wanted to become rich, and so they could quit, and do something much easier and much less dangerous, for the rest of their lives. They could marry the woman of their dreams, raise a family in a nice, expensive home, and live more of a life of luxury. However, there were some cowboys, it wasn't just Curly Bill, who really didn't seem either capable of living that kind of more sensible life, or they didn't want it, or they were afraid of it. It's interesting. But Curly Bill was one of those. That he just seemed to love chaos. He was what today you might call an agent of chaos. He just had this wild, crazy edge to him where he just, even his loyalty to his fellow comrades kind of waned over time. He became more of an individualist, kind of looking out for himself, where he didn't really want to be a leader anymore. Not too much is known about that. We only have bits and pieces for what was happening with these different characters at that time. But I mean, it's definitely very interesting. He's a very interesting character, and but anyway, my point was that despite the fact that he was very much a careless, kind of joyfully savage, kind of Wild West pirate character, he who was known really to be an excellent shot, especially with a pistol, and to very much not be afraid. He seemed to be afraid of Wyatt Earp. There is some evidence that suggests that he was. So anyway, there's the gunfight at the OK Corral, and then the cowboys want revenge, and they don't take it right away, but there's a lot of talk. Curly Bill wasn't interested. The old Curly Bill, the Curly Bill that you would expect Curly Bill to be, the way that he always was, I mean, he would have just found a way, would have followed Wyatt Earp around and just found a way to kill him, you know, I would have tried. But at this point in time, it was different. And I think they were intimidated also at this point. I'm going to try to keep this short and quick. Often there's a misconception that the supporters of the Earps, they ended up becoming the Earp posse in the Vendetta Ride. That there's a misconception that they didn't actually form until after one of Wyatt Earp's brothers was killed. I don't want to give away any too many spoilers here, but someone very close to Wyatt Earp, one of his brothers, tragically is killed in the story, and which was very hard for me to write. I think I've said that before. I was very, very affected in writing the story, even though I didn't know any of these people. Of course, it affected me a lot. So what happened was that the cowboys finally decided to get their revenge, and they targeted one of Earp's brothers, and then they targeted another one. And those two attacks didn't happen in the same night, as is depicted sometimes for dramatic effect. I did not write it that way. I wrote it the way it really happened. The way it really happened was that those two different attacks occurred months apart. There's quite a story to all this, and there's a lot that was happening in between those two attacks. But two of Wyatt Earp's brothers were attacked. One was fatal. The other one was near fatal. One of them almost died, and one of them did die. It wasn't just a simple thing of being shot in the shoulder or something. It was, these were serious attacks. But the second attack, the main target was Wyatt Earp. The cowboys wanted to kill Wyatt Earp. They managed to successfully kill one of his brothers, but Curly Bill with a rifle missed, and he had a fairly clear shot of Wyatt Earp, who was oblivious, surrounded by his the men who would become the posse men. Basically, his allies were there, armed. They were fully prepared for an attack before there were any attacks against the Earp faction. They were ready for it. After the shoot at the OK Corral, their allies were already armed and protecting them all the time. They were prepared for it, which is part of the reason why it may have taken a while for an attack to come and then a second attack, as the cowboys were cautious. They didn't want to get into a actual gunfight to the death. I mean, another one, I should say. They just wanted to cowardly, shoot their targets from afar and run away and get away with it. So a lot of this was trying not to be noticed while they were watching, and very closely all the time, as much as possible, I'm sure, the Earps, and trying to look for those windows of opportunity where they could get an easy shot and then run. So that's what happened. Where one was almost killed, another one actually killed. But yes, Curly Bill famously missed shooting Wyatt Earp. He hit the wall just beside his head. He just barely missed him, but he missed him. That was the first time that Curly Bill misses. And then the actual, I don't want to again go into spoilers here, but just to explain what happens is that there's a lot of politics behind this, which is difficult to discuss this quickly. Basically, Wyatt Earp is supported by the local Republican establishment. They've had enough of these cowboys. There's a lot that I'm leaving out of this because it's a huge story, which is why I wrote this large book detailing what happened. But finally, the local establishment has had enough of these cowboys murdering, thieving, and corrupting the local systems in Tombstone and in various other towns surrounding Tombstone. I mean, they more or less were controlling or coming into a place of controlling the whole state of Arizona. And the government knew it, the federal government. The president at the time, I forget his name, but whoever was president at the time was watching very closely the events that were taking place. And the U.S. military was securing the border because Mexico was suffering numerous attacks of the cowboys that would raid and steal their cattle. Other times they would raid American ranches and sell their cattle to Mexico. But they were also doing a lot of rustling, in Mexico. So the U.S. border was secured. The U.S. military was trying to stop the cowboys. The government wanted the cowboys stopped. They didn't know who exactly were the cowboys, and to this day it's still debated a lot for exactly who were all. I mean, we basically know who the leaders were. We know who a lot of the cowboys were, but there's still room to debate exactly who went where and did what, because there were a lot of different groups within the cowboys, and not a whole lot of facts are known for sure. So it's the kind of thing where we basically know, but we don't know like a lot of specifics. So the Earps were used by the state government, and to some extent, I believe the federal government. The federal government was certainly very interested in the Earps helping the local establishment to stop the cowboys. So it was Judge Stilwell that spoke to Wyatt Earp discreetly and offered him a deal. He let him know that the establishment was behind him. And what exactly was said there isn't entirely known, but I mean, Wyatt Earp himself has said this, and I believe it. There's no reason for him to well, you could make an argument that he was lying, but I believe Wyatt Earp, that he really did have that discussion with Judge Stilwell, and the establishment did, no matter what you believe, the establishment did help the Earp posse to hunt down and kill the cowboys. And so this wasn't just revenge, and it was certainly revenge for Wyatt Earp for what was done to his brothers, and to himself, of course, but it was also justice. It was also settling an old feud, and it was also self-defense, because even while this was going on, that Wyatt Earp was and his supporters were forming a posse and preparing to hunt down and kill all the cowboy leaders. Who all exactly they were going after isn't really known for sure. They were certainly going after everyone that Wyatt Earp believed was responsible for his brother's death. Yeah, everyone that was involved in it, not just the one that shot him, but the ones that were participating in the attempt. Basically, everyone that he felt was responsible. But it's a bit of a gray area, and there's not much is known. I believe that there was a lot more violence, a lot more fighting that was happening than that. A lot of the cowboys just disappeared in this period of time, were never seen again. And people can argue, oh, they went off and they, created new identities for themselves. And that doesn't make any sense, because the law wasn't specific after anyone specifically, really. The law didn't have the goods on any particular individual. It was the organization itself. People didn't really have the goods on who these exact members were, who the leaders were. They always did things together, and they'd always give each other alibis, and of course they deny, and they would attack their accusers. Anyone that came out to give any evidence, they'd either disappear, they'd run away, they'd change their story, they'd be threatened. And so, I mean, they got away with a hell of a lot, and it was always very hard to pin down with any evidence, who was guilty of whatever specific crime. So, I mean, this criminal organization itself was the problem. So the best solution, the most logical solution, was to stop the leaders. And since you couldn't do it through the law because they were corrupting the local, justice system, they were corrupting everything, and they got away with literally murder. The only way to stop them logically was to hunt them down and kill them, which yes, that's where it becomes a gray area, because you can argue that, well, that's cold-blooded murder, and it absolutely was, but it was also war. This was a bizarre kind of little civil war that was happening between law and order and a criminal organization that had risen above what law and order could handle, basically. They were above the law because there were so many of them, and they protected each other so well, and they threatened off any accusers. They got away with everything. And the only way to stop them was to hunt them down and kill all the leaders. And that's exactly what the Earp posse did. And Wyatt Earp himself killed a number of these people. All of what happened isn't known. There are certain things that are known or are accepted as having happened. I don't want to go into spoilers here, but there are a small number of murders that are accepted to have taken place. Otherwise, historians, this is a whole other conversation, but historians lean on the side of, how do I put this? They assume less happened. That's a term that I use to describe how they look at it. I don't mean any disrespect to anyone, but I don't personally agree with assuming less. So a whole bunch of these cowboys disappeared, even though the law wasn't after them specifically. It was just Wyatt Earp. So after Wyatt Earp stopped his Vendetta Ride, after the Earp posse went their separate ways, why would all those cowboys stay in hiding? Why would they change their names and keep their changed names? Why wouldn't they be outright bragging about having been involved with the cowboys and taking on the Earps? They were arrogant people that came from broken backgrounds, and the only thing they had was ego, pride. I am this, I did this. Making themselves out to be larger than life, that's all they really had. These were people that felt so small inside that they were capable of doing horrible things because they didn't have the self-respect, the dignity not to. The only thing these people had was their ego, the feeling of self-importance. For them to just hide away forever and ever for no reason, that makes no sense. I'm sorry. It's quite obvious to me that a lot happened, and I don't know. No one knows what happened. But to assume that none of that happened, no, I'm sure, even though it makes no sense at all these cowboys just disappeared. They all just ran off for no reason. Let's just assume that because it's less. Let's not assume that more happened, that there was a lot more fighting. It's like even those people that, how do I put this? I understand that comes from a place of, let's be intellectually honest. Like, let's not make Wyatt Earp to be greater than he was anymore, or make him worse. Like, let's try to be intellectually honest and fair to everyone. Let's not make him into more of a godly figure, by assuming. And I understand that you can't say, but as a fact, that he killed any more than just a handful of people. But the more you look at it, I mean, it only makes sense that there was a lot of fighting going on, and it may not have all involved Wyatt Earp himself. It could have been his posse. Maybe there were other people involved that we never knew about. I'm sure a lot, well, I shouldn't say I'm sure, but I think a lot more will come out over time. There's still people looking into this period and pulling out more information, and we may end up learning a lot more about the details as time goes on. But it's pretty clear to me that I can only say this much for, well, I'm going to say for a fact, but from my opinion anyway, from my perspective, I'm going to say that it seems pretty clear to me that there was a lot of fighting between the cowboys and the Earps, and I'm sure a lot of people were killed, a lot of people were buried, and in other words, people just disappeared, and so I think there was quite a lot of violence happening, quite a long and intense fight between those factions, a lot of people that died, and that's my opinion, just based on what is known of Wyatt Earp's character, the men he was with, how determined they were to do what they were doing, the power behind them, protecting them from the law, from the repercussions of it. They were risking their lives, and it was not fun. It was war, and really, no matter which way I look at it, I can't help but see that there was a huge conflict going on there. It wasn't just they traveled over here and they killed this person and they traveled there and then they hung out in a cabin together, and for months and didn't do anything. And, that's a whole other discussion. And if anyone has any thoughts on that or disagrees with me, feel free to say so, and we can discuss it. There's a lot more I could say of this. I'm trying to keep this as short as possible. I'm already going way longer here in this video than I wanted to. But my point is that there was a lot more that happened than just a few people got shot. The Earp Vendetta Ride, as it was called, involved a lot more bloodshed, in my opinion, than what we'll probably ever know. But I didn't write it that way. I didn't want the end of my book to just be one big bloodbath. This is an important story to me, and it's Wyatt Earp's story. It's a story of the Wild West. So I mostly stuck to what is known to have happened, and I used some common sense to explore a bit more of what I believe was happening. When it comes to the death of Johnny Ringo, I cannot discuss that with going into spoilers, so I'll just say this. It's not really known how he died. So, and you can't gloss over. If you're going to do a novelization, so to speak, of this period of time, of history, you've got to write the death of Johnny Ringo. And no one really knows for sure how he died. I hope that I did it justice. I hope that by using the facts that were available to me and logic, common sense, that I wrote an ending that I hope I wrote an ending that will appeal to the majority of people that know of the history here and respect, respect facts over, opinions or whatever. People that are interested in what really happened. I would hope that they'll be pleased with what I did, because there's no way for me to know, of course, any more than anyone else exactly what happened. But using the facts that were available to me, using my common sense, I believe I did a good job of resolving it for my book. So yes, I wrote it in such a way that I was accounting for what realistically would have happened without going into the, how do I put this, fantasizing, basically, making things up too much. So it's a fine line you're walking between just following the cold facts, which would then require you to ignore a lot of common sense. Basically, there's a lot of stuff that is known that contradicts with these common assumptions. So I approached it in the most intellectually honest way that I knew how to do. And I'm happy with what I came up with. I'm always interested in hearing from different perspectives and people's thoughts on this stuff. And in my videos as well, feedback is always helpful, Like if you have any criticism of my videos, feel free to share, because it helps me to hear what people think or feel, because I'm kind of new to this. Even though I've made videos in the past, I'm new to just discussing me and my books. So if there's anything that I'm doing that you think that is wrong, or something that you think I should do more of, please let me know what you think, because it helps. Basically, the Vendetta Ride is a gray area, because technically, legally, Wyatt Earp and his posse took the law into their own hands, as they like to say, and hunted down and killed these cowboys in cold execution, or sometimes things don't always go to plan in crazy gunfights. And so they hunted down and killed, we don't know exactly how many, but a number of cowboys, and certainly as many people on the list of who killed his brother as they could possibly find. And so that's what's known. To this day, it's an interesting, controversial situation, where the only way for there to be justice was to hunt down and kill the leaders of this criminal organization, since the law failed time and time again to be able, they just were not able to stop them. And also, like I say, while this was going on, the cowboys kept killing and attempting to kill people close to Wyatt Earp. and their allies as well, people that helped them financially or politically, were under attack and either had to flee for their lives or were murdered. And there was another attack on Wyatt Earp's own family that failed, but another attempt made to kill more family of Wyatt Earp just before the actual Vendetta Ride actually started. So, I mean, to an extent, it was self-defense, because the cowboys were, at this point, were never going to stop trying to kill Wyatt Earp and his brothers and everyone that helped them. So what choice did Wyatt Earp have to defend himself and his family but to hunt down and kill the cowboys? Because ultimately in war, offense is easier than defense. And there comes a point, and that could apply today. I don't mean to incite violence or in any way. I'm just saying that there comes a point where in one way or another you've got to stand up and fight. There comes a point where you can't just roll over and play dead. If you're dealing with a criminal organization of any kind, you've got to make a stand at some point. With the cowboys, I see no other possible way of handling them, in my view. You know, and I know some people are just absolutely law and order every time, or whatever is legal. You have no right to take the law in your own hands. But I think that even the president, even the government at the time understood that this was an exceptional circumstance. And by doing what he did, Wyatt Earp and his posse, what were they called now? The Immortals. Wyatt Earp and his Immortals, as they were called, basically wiped out the first, or one of the early kind of mafias, basically, an early mafia in the States. And what was left of the cowboys fragmented and fell apart afterwards. So it's one hell of a story, you know, and I don't know what else to say here. I'm proud that I was able to write this. I mean, I didn't have to get permission because it's history, so, you know, but I don't know, it's weird. I feel really good about having written this story, and I hope that it educates and inspires and opens people's minds to who Wyatt Earp was and the good that he did for America. You know, I mean, he was an extraordinary hero, and the men that rode with him deserve credit as well. And I know not everyone may agree. It is certainly, you know, when you're dealing with reality, it's not all black and white. You know, were the Earps perfect human beings? Of course not. No one is. Were the cowboys just one-dimensionally evil? Well, some of them you might have a hard time seeing them as anything but for the most part, no, they weren't just, you know, one-dimensionally evil. So it's not all so black and white, but at the same time, it is what it is, and I don't know. Feel free to express your thoughts or opinions on the situation. For me, I think it was heroic.